adding to the smooth follow, we're actually going to add the zoom feature to it. That way, like we were saying before, when the character jumps, we can have the camera like zoom back and kind of just get that feel that you're getting to see a little bit more when the character jumps. So instead of maybe a y-axis going up and down, there's more of a pull back on the camera. Alright, so let's go ahead and start adding to it. What we want to do is just place in a couple of variables. That way we have some more variables to use. The first variable we'll have is just a camera zoom. And this one is just going to be our boolean just to check for true and false. So we'll do this one set. And for now, we'll just set it to false, just so that when you do apply it, it's something you have to actually consciously set up for it. And this will just be toggle for zoom in and out on, we'll say it's going to be the orthographic size, which is what we're going to adjust here in a little bit. Alright, so we have the camera zoom. We've also got a variable. We'll set one for camera zoom max and camera zoom min. And let's do both of these here. Camera zoom min. So we want to have both of these set in, and these will just be float values. We'll set the first one. This is one that you probably want to work with and adjust until you get to the right amount. We'll start off with just a 2.5 for it, and this is going to be the basically it's the minimum amount that the camera can pull in. And pull in. And then this one, of course, will be the opposite here. This will be the maximum amount it can pull out. And at the moment, we'll set it to 4. If you notice, our current size right here in the camera is set to 2.6. So the distance we're looking at right now, if this was what you wanted the game to be, we could even set this to 2.6. If you don't mind it going a little bit further, you could have it set for a little bit less on that one. So this will be the maximum amount. Now the camera can pull out. Alright, and then let's go ahead and set one more. We'll do a zoom time for it. That way we can have a variable that we control the speed of the zoom in and out. And this one again, we'll set this one to a float. And we'll start off with about we're going to create kind of a very small variable here. You notice that when we start adjusting it, you'll be able to see what speed you want it to actually be set for. So again, this will be the speed for camera zooming. Alright, so we have our camera variable set up for the zooming in and out. We got a maximum and minimum, we got a time amount. Let's go ahead and set up a couple other ones here. First one is going to be the current position. Let's actually place in a couple of private variables here. Here, we'll put these below it. So first private variable, we'll set up a current position. So we're going to need a position of the player where he currently is, and then we're going to need a position of the position as the player gets pulled out from it. So we'll do a current position. And we'll look at this one in a second when we start to write it out. This one will just be a float. We'll just set to null value here. And this one, again, this will be the current position of the camera target, the player object here. Alright, then we're going to have another private variable here. And this one, let's do the player jump height, and we'll set it to a float and zeros. Alright, so this is going to store the jump height. We're going to base the camera, the distance it pulls back is going to be based off of how high the player actually jumps. So if the player just barely taps it, the zoom just barely goes back. If the player jumps like a crouch jump going up, then the camera will pull back even further before it starts to go back down, because when the character goes up, the highest it goes up is the furthest it goes out. Okay, so then when the character starts to go back down, the number decreases, which makes the camera pull back in. Alright, so that's our basic idea in terms of how we're going to set up the system for it. Alright, so let's see, if we go down here into the update, we're going to go ahead and start using the variables that we're creating and working with here. For the update, let's go ahead and do the first one, which is the check. So we'll say that if the camera zoom is true, Alright, so if camera zoom is true, then what do we actually want to do? Well, we need to do a couple of things here, and we'll set up the basic ideas that we need to get the current position. So we'll say get current position of players, current Y position, meaning that we need to actually get the get a component script, and this is going to actually need to get the actual player. We're going to need to get information from player controls right here. We want to make sure we know where the player is right now. So where's player? Alright, so it's things like this one. If you notice, I'm doing a little bit differently than we've done before, is that if I'm working in code and all of a sudden I start to get to a point where I need to write down some notes, I'll go ahead and just write down a quick kind of pseudo thing of notes going what my basic objective is actually inside of here, and then we can work from it. So for instance, on this one, we're looking for the current position of the player. And then in order to get, once we get the current position of the player, then we can actually make sure that we're setting the right variables to the camera so that it pulls in and out. So we need to check for, we'll do a check for player's position and how it relates to the current position. This one, current position, and the, we'll say, current jump height position. Alright, so I'm just writing down some notes for myself so that I can understand where I'm trying to go with it. So if I have the player's information of when he was here, when he jumps, the moment he jumps in the air, I need to know the distance between the initial jump and then the height of the jump where he's going. Alright, and then that's going to give me a number. So for instance, if he jumps up 9, that lets me know that the camera can move back a certain number percentage based off of the 9 for the height of the jump. Alright, and that part of it, we'll say then that if we know the right number, then we actually want to adjust the orthographic size from camera to equal the new to equal the height jump distance. And this part of it, let's think about using something like a mathlerp or something simple that we just need to feed in a from and a to and a time. Alright. So this is something that you may find yourself doing on occasions, is actually like what I'm doing right now, is just writing out the your objectives. This would be a little bit scarier to do, especially first time through, is that when you're creating it this way, it's not thinking all the way through the bigger picture, but it's just thinking about the one small objective right here. So if you're really clear about knowing your goals, then this would be a fine way to actually write it and then to start working through. So let's go ahead and start looking at some of the variables we need to actually get. The first one that we need to actually get is over in the player controls. So let's go to our player controls and double click the script file for it. Alright, so on the script for this one, we need to actually start looking at a couple of different things. We need we actually need a position to actually pull from. Right? If you remember, we did the starting position right here. This is just the location of the character. So we're actually going to use the start position, and we need to feed it into the code in a couple of spots on the jumps. That way we know when the character is actually jumping. So inside the update function, I'm just going to go in through here. What we want to do is get the start position, basically for the camera to subtract from from the zooming in and out. We could take, let's see, if we were to take it, for instance, maybe we want it just on the jump. If we took it on each one of the jumps, one of the things that I found while working through it was that when I did a jump option for it, the only time the update happened was when you actually push the button. So it was kind of when the player jumped, the camera would zoom out, but it wouldn't actually store any other values, so it kind of stuck a little bit. One of the easiest ways to make sure that there's a really nice smooth zoom in and out happening is to actually just keep it inside of the top area. So for instance, we just want it so that as long as the character is grounded, whether they're jumping or not jumping, as long as the character is grounded, we just want to go ahead and get the start position of the player. So by having the start position of the player this way, we'll actually Let's just set it all the way here then. There we go. We want to make sure that it's storing the position y. So we'll do the transform dot position on it, and we just want the y-axis for it. So the y variable up and down, and again, this is just going to be a basically just for the camera to subtract from, so you have the right amount to zoom in and to zoom out on. So we'll say this for camera to subtract from on zooming in and out. Alright, so that's going to give us a variable we can use inside of our camera. So let's go ahead and save this one. And then let's go ahead and jump back into the smooth follow here. And on the camera, the first thing that we need to do is let's go ahead and grab up our get component. So in here, so that we're constantly just getting it, we'll just place it right above here. We'll do a player control. That way we know that we're grabbing the information from the player controller. We'll say variable player control is going to equal the player dot. Oops. We'll say player dot get component. And the player component, what we want from it is going to be the player script. So the player controls. So this would be the script file that we get from it. So we're going to be able to gain access to all the script file information through our player control. And we're getting this from the player. Player, if you remember, is our game object right here. So what we want to actually make sure goes into the player is the actual player itself. So for instance, inside of here, I would drag player onto player. Alright, so nice and easy, same name, makes it easier to find. Alright, so then back inside of here, once we have control of our player, then let's go ahead and start working on the zoom side of it. Alright, so the first part of it, let's go ahead and get the current position. So we have that variable for current position that we have right here. Alright, so we'll say current position at the moment for the zoom is going to be equal to the player dot transform and dot position dot y. Alright. And this part of it, this is just going to allow us to set the current position to the player's current y position. So let's go ahead and do a couple of comments here. So for instance, this one, this is going to set our current position, basically. Oops. The current position to the player's current y position. Player's current y position. Alright. And what we want to have happen from this one as well is we want to, let's go ahead and do our next line right here. We want to actually get from the height, we want to get our player's jump height is going to be equal to our current player's position minus the player's start position. Okay, so when the player jumps, the player jumping right here, this variable is going to change constantly. The moment he starts to leap off the ground, it's going to start changing. If you remember, inside the player control is only based off of ground. The moment he leaves the ground, this number right here, it actually stops updating. So the moment he leaves the ground, that's the last number that gets updated until he touches the ground again. Alright, so inside of here, we have our current position that we're grabbing of a constant change. So when it gets to the highest point and it starts to go back down, this number changes. So in order to get the right number for the height of it, we're going to have one that will just use the player jump height that we have. Let's see, player jump height. So player jump height. Make sure I spelled that one right. Alright, so player jump height. This one's going to equal our current position. Alright, and we're going to subtract it from our player control option, which is right here, player control. And what we want is the start position. Alright, so again, remember start position. Inside player control, we have start position. Alright. So we have those. We'll go ahead and clean up this part so we don't have to see it. Alright. So with that one, again, this is just taking it and it's going to subtract, just like we had stated from the other one, we're just going to be subtracting the current height from the character control. So we have our subtracting the current height from our player control start position. Alright. Now that we have those two, that actually kind of basically sets us up so that we have the right setup to get the right number. This will be a constantly changing number just simply because the current position is changing. So as it grows and as it shrinks, it'll go from the original point where the player started. It'll either grow upwards and then start to shrink down as the player lands back down. Now, when I was originally coming up with this one, this was something that it was probably 2 or 3 times the size of code, trying to think through the idea of how to make it and how to make it really optimized and how to make it small. So this is something, again, if you're coming up with it the first time through, be aware that you may come up with a lot of different variations until you start to really refine the code and get it down to just what you need. So for this one, what we're going to do is check for the player height. Part of this is that part of the checks that we want to do is make sure that our player jump height is, we're going to say that if it's less than 0, there's certain variables that we don't want to have happen. One is that we don't want it to go into the negatives. So we're just going to say that if any of the numbers, so for instance the player itself, all he has to do is be below, let's find the line here. Okay, so this is the origin point, 0, 0 in the world. The moment the character goes below this, he's actually in a negative number. And we don't really want the negative number to be part of the equation, so we're going to make sure that everything always stays a positive on it. So if at any point the player jump height goes to a negative number, so anything less than 0, we're just going to simply take the player jump height and let's see, I think I've already got it stored here. The player jump height, we're going to make it multiplied by negative 1. If we do a negative 1 on it, that means that anything negative is going to be positive. Alright. And you could probably just call a function up for that as well, just to make sure that it's forced to a positive and not set as a negative. Okay, the other option that we want to do is we want to make a limit to the camera for the distance it goes back. So we're just going to say that the player jump height, for this one, if it's greater than the camera zoom, so say camera zoom max, and if it's greater than the camera zoom max, then let's go ahead and set it to camera zoom max. That way it actually doesn't go any further past that one. So again, we'll say then player jump height is going to actually equal camera zoom max. Alright. Oops. And there we go. So we've got two areas that we've adjusted for just to make sure, kind of just checks, is that anything that's negative will wind up being a positive on it. And this is through playing around with it earlier, is that what I noticed that you have some issues. If you don't have this in there, then you're going to have some oddities come up when you start getting to anything below the origin point when it gets into any negatives. The other side is that if you don't want the camera to zoom too far out, you may want the camera to just zoom as far as you want out, but if you don't want it to zoom too far out, you want to have a controlled distance to make sure that once it gets to a certain distance out, it just automatically equals that distance. That way it won't go any further than that. Now, these are going to be checks for us. The last thing that we want to do is actually create a lerp so that we have a from and a to, and we can base it on a time. So if you remember, inside of our options right here, if we actually just type in lerp, and what we have on lerp is we have one that we're going to use as the math lerp. So again, this is going to be when t is equal to 0, return from. So t is going to equal 1, it goes 2. It's basically just going back and forth between the distance. And we'll have a from to and a time right here. Alright, so let's go ahead and create that one. So just based off of that one, we'll just go in here and we're going to make the camera. Now this is another thing that if I was just to ask you right now is how do I get the camera's size? How do you get to this variable right here? So again, say I didn't actually type in the code. I don't know what I'm trying to get to, how to get to it, but I know I want this variable right here. I want that. Spend a second, try to figure it out. These are kind of simple finds, but if you're searching through and an hour goes by, well, this is kind of a good indicator to let you know that you still need to really dig into the API. You still really need to start understanding and practicing how to get to certain variables. You should be able to get to anything inside of here relatively easy at this point. Alright, so how do you get to size? Well, if you're thinking about the camera, so again, if we're just trying to follow, things through, I would start off with thinking about camera itself. So I type in camera, And then inside of camera class, let's go ahead and go into it. And it looks like if we were looking through here, do we see the word size? So I would look through here and try to find something that says size. We have nothing through here. We keep going down. We still don't see anything up here. You could also do a quick search as well. So for instance, maybe we want to do something that just says anything with size. So I'll just do a quick find down here and type in size. And we go, oh, hey, look at that. There's orthographic size. So the size itself isn't actually the name size, it's orthographic size. Okay, so now we have our orthographic size that we can actually access. Now, that means that if we want to actually change that number, all we have to do is call up, now it can be the main camera, but we could also just call up a camera. That way, if someone doesn't have main set, it's not gonna be throwing an error for it. So we can say camera orthographic size equals, and that's gonna actually change that for us. Alright. So if we're down here, and we're trying to get everything set up and finished off on it, we could say this camera, the orthographic size. Alright, so we have our orthographic size is going to equal our math lerp that we're going to use for it. And oops, let's make sure we go ahead and let's see, we'll do the math lerp, make sure it's a lowercase there on the F. And inside of the lerp, we have our parameters for it. This is going to be this camera dot orthographic. And the orthographic size, so we're going to start with whatever current size it's at. So right now it's at 2.6. That means where we're going from is whatever the current size is. Okay, and then we want to go to the player jump height. And then we can also add to the player jump height, we're going to add the camera zoom minimum. That way the camera is going to actually not go in any closer. If we don't have this in, then it actually zooms in too close to the player. So we'll have zoom min. So the camera zoom min. And then the last part of it we want to have is just the time. So we'll do standard time multiplied by the camera zoom time. So camera zoom time. Alright. And what this gives us, if you can tell from this line right here, this is actually going to provide us the orthographic size changing and updating. So as long as the camera zoom is true, then what it's going to do is actually grab our variable. So for instance here, it's going to take the current position, and this is the updated constantly. As long as zoom is set, it's going to be updating wherever the player is at. And then the player jump height is going to store the current position subtracted from whenever the player left the ground. Alright, and then we're going to double check that it's not a negative. If it is, we change it to a positive. And then after that, the player jump height, this is setting that cap to it, so that if it's too far out past the zoom max, it's automatically equal to it, so that it's just going to stop any further out movement. And then again, that last part we did, we looked for orthographic size, and this was going to be equal to our lerp, and the lerp was looking from from, which was from the current position of the camera's orthographic size, going out based off of the player jump height, how far up he was going, plus the zoom, and then multiplied by the time multiplied by the camera time. Alright, so let's go ahead and try this one out here. Make sure again that make sure we've got the semicolons on everything. Looks like it's looking for line 12. So again, if this was one of those things that you caught while you're working on it, great. Be sure to go ahead and correct it. Up on the zoom in, I just didn't have the semicolon on there. Alright, so we'll jump back into here. And at this point, when I play, now remember, the camera follow height is the zoom is currently unchecked, so we'll go ahead and check this one. And when I check it, notice that it zooms out to a distance here. Now if I'm running and I'm playing the character, when I jump, it goes out. Alright? So if there's a distance, so for instance on the min and the max, actually we've got these, let's see, max is going to be 4, and then the min's supposed to be 2.5. There we go. So with that one, when I jump, it zooms out smooth and it goes back. And this even works for small jumps like this. This is one of those things where maybe just the crouch jump would be really cool, that when you do a crouch jump, the camera actually for zoom is set to true, and it allows you to actually zoom out like that. Alright? So definitely a cool little feature, a very simple feature to actually add to it. First time around though, even for myself, this took probably an hour and a half or so to figure out and just try to get down so that it was a smooth zoom in out constantly for it. And then again, the zoom time, if you want it to go even slower than the camera in terms of the speed for the orthographic size, you can slow it down by just decreasing the amount of time that gets added to it. Alright, so that is our zoom added to the camera smooth follow, and you can actually check and uncheck that as you work with it. Let's make sure that the max and the min actually get corrected here as well. So we'll take the max amount to 4 and the min. We'll set the min amount to the same, currently to the same size we have, which is 2.6. That way those are set. And then inside of here, let's change those up. Those are things, again, when I'm typing, if I just wind up missing those, again, if you catch it, then just correct it while you're going. And I'll eventually correct it when I see it. Alright, so we've got our code finished off for that one. The last thing I'll do, I'll just go through and comment on the code itself, and then we'll finish off on the camera smooth follow, and then we'll move into the camera border follow. Okay, so if you finish off the commenting, it should look similar to this. Again, we'll start off at the top. We'll have the label for our component, which is a camera smooth follow 2D with an optional zooming. And then, again, if you want to put additional information, one extra thing I added to here is that if your code is going off places, you can always add your, whether it's an email address, whether it's a website, you can add that to it. You can also add the date from the last time that you updated it. And then after that part, the description, and then how to use it. And then below, I just placed in the commenting for it here, so you can see what was commented there, and what's commented up there. Alright, so this will finish off our smooth follow 2D camera with optional zooming.